Hi, friend. Niklas here. Welcome to another episode of the Your Audio Solutions podcast, where it's my mission to find the tools and method from the people that inspire you so you can apply their knowledge to your own life and work. And on the show today, we have tech entrepreneur and investor Pascal Pilon. He's currently running LANDR, which, if you're into the music industry or in the music industry, I'm sure you've heard of it. If not, LANDR is a cloud-based automated mastering service which helps music makers, producers, artists, whatever, get instant mastered tracks with just a few clicks. So it's a super cool software, cloud-based software, and we see more and more AI and tech becoming a bigger part of the music industry. And obviously, it comes with benefits and disadvantages. So I'd love to know, what is your take on AI in the music industry? Will it take over our jobs or some jobs? Will it allow us to be more creative? I'd love to know what your thoughts are and where you stand in this whole AI revolution in the music industry. So let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But it was great talking to Pascal, and I hope you will enjoy our conversation as well. Now, if you want exclusive access to interviews before the public and a chance to ask up-and-coming guests questions, join the Audio Tribe. It's free. Just use the link below and just enter your name and email address that you have joined. Also, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel and Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, feel free to leave a rating so we can get more and more guests on the show, and so I can serve you better. But that's it. Let's get into the conversation with Pascal Pilon from LANDR. It would be awesome to maybe start out the conversation, just learning a bit more about you and how did you start LANDR, actually. Maybe that's a good starting point for this conversation.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been an entrepreneur for the last 20 years, and back in 2013, I was just exiting my previous venture, and I came across an incubator here in Montreal called Tandem Launch that is focused on taking inventions from universities around the world and trying to turn them into companies. So I partner with them and their founder, Elgie Season, to bring a technology that's been developed at Queen Mary University in London, UK.
Cool.
And we brought that to Montreal with the main researcher. So that was the genesis of LANDR back in 2013. And from that point on, I invested money that I got from my previous company. A local VC here called Real Venture invested as well. And we hired people. We, from the get-go, decided to turn that invention into a cloud-based infrastructure. Funny enough, in the first year, the company was called Mix Genius because the technology that we patented is capable of doing both mixing and mastering, because it was first created for live sounds.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
That's interesting.
So yeah. So but as we looked after that, we decided to focus on mastering, because a lot of the time people were reacting somewhat negatively to the fact that the mixing aspect could be automated using artificial intelligence. And we wanted to really focus on the technical aspects of music creation, as opposed to kind of interfering or claiming that we would be doing some of the creative process ourselves. So we really positioned ourselves just on mastering. And so we built that platform on Amazon AWS servers. And soon after, people poured in. So we had a few hundred people in the first month, and then thousands of people, and then tens of thousands of people leading us to today where we have 3.4 million users.
Wow. I mean, yeah, I remember when you guys sort of came onto the scene, it was a few years ago now. And obviously, there's a lot of people, who have strong opinions, I guess you can say, about AI taking over jobs, etc., etc., especially in the music industry, I guess. Uh, so, I mean, did you ever get any pushback for, what you were trying to do?
We got that more in the early days. Now we never hear that anymore.
Right.
I guess so the product came to the market in May 2014. So in those days, sound engineers really felt jeopardized. But the reality is that most sound engineers who are doing work, they're doing the work oftentimes. There's basically on the high end of the market, you've got people who are mixing engineers, and you've got master engineers, and you've got producers, but that's only for a small portion of the market. Oftentimes, musicians will hire an engineer who will be mixing and mastering things himself, right? So oftentimes it's the same person. And most sound engineers, they're just happy to rely on LANDR. Right. Because the way that LANDR operates, it really masters transparently from the mix that you create. So it really gives you the power to change your mix so that the master is great. So we've created a new workflow that we call mix referencing, where people come with their mix, they master their song, and typically people would master their song asking a sound engineer to do that, and that would be done, right? But on LANDR, your first master gets you to go back to your mix and readjust your mix so that you then master again, and back and forth until you're happy about this. So our most sophisticated users will do 5 masters, right, to get the definitive result they're looking after. So that process is kind of new. So and a big portion of our user base are our sound engineers, right? And a lot of labels are using us as well, because of course the artists who are big earners, they're not really concerned about the cost of like paying a master engineer. But for many people, they're just like short on cash and not sure that they're going to be able to ever make any money on this. So the economics are much easier and better when using LANDR.
But so is LANDR targeted more to bedroom producers, songwriters then, or what's the audience?
Well, that was the intent. So the intent at first was to basically get beginners, and I'd say bedroom producers, to have a solution to solve their needs. But within a few months from after launch, famous DJs approached us and said, "Guys, we love what you're doing, because when we have a show in a given night and we're putting a new song together or putting a new mix together, we always are tight on time to master this before we get to actually play it live." Right. So DJs really loved it for the speed at which it operates. And then we also had similar feedback from sound engineers, because as they were recording sessions with bands and singers, right, they typically put together the rough mix so that the band, before they leave, have a feeling if they have the right takes and so forth. But now, on top of providing a rough mix, they master the rough mix so they can show the song close to where it can be. And oftentimes people fall in love with that, and this becomes the definitive result of the song itself. And for songwriters and ad agencies, just the same. If you want to pitch a song or a beat or an instrumental, it's better if it's mastered, right? So previously, stuff that was not final to be released was not mastered. But now people subscribe and they master everything. So that's something we've changed. There's way more song being mastered today than before, because even if you don't intend to use something long term, you'll master it to take a critical perspective on it.
Right. I mean, I haven't used LANDR myself. But is LANDR sort of pushing the loudness war in a bad direction, or is it is LANDR trying to compete with loudness to use always become louder and louder, or is that something that you can choose as a user?
Well, you can choose it as a user. we really, so if you look at what LANDR does, it really tries to position itself as the assistant of the music creator. So if the music creator want to come in and want to have something very loud, LANDR will provide him something very loud. But if the producer or the musician is coming in and would like to have like an old school approach to mastering and make it very delicate and not too intervening, we do that as well.
Right.
So the software, the platform adapts to the personality of the user himself.
Right.
So and the thing that, because it's machine learning based, right? It's basically mimicking behaviors of actual sound engineers.
Right.
So there's different personalities for sound engineers who are providing the mastering work, right? So we are mimicking that because we're basically portraying the production styles that exist today on the market,
right.
and that existed best as well.
That is something that is super cool, because it's just AI, machine learning, whatever. How maybe you're not able to maybe go in depth into how the technology works, but when you did create that sort of AI technology, did you actually go out and model, or however you want to say it, model professional mastering engineers to actually create different type of flavors, or how was that process?
Yeah, well, the actual technique is based on what exists on the market today, right? So a little bit like the Econest that you're familiar with, that was purchased by Spotify a long time ago.
Right.
Econest, when I launched LANDR, they already had a product that was showing up something like 1,400 different genres
right.
that existed on the market, right? So each of those genres are characterized by certain sonic features, right? Certain genres will be lo-fi by nature. Some others will be like crystal clear. Some will be very loud. Some will not be, right? Each genre has a tendency to have a certain stereo image, right, to portray that this is happening in a certain venue and so forth. So those patterns per genre, for instance, are the type of things that are guiding us to automatically set something based on what the user uploads onto LANDR. But on top of that, we look at things like the quality of the recording and certain features of a mix to see. So if we think something is broken or poorly recorded, we might want to intervene and try to repair that automatically.
Right.
If something comes in, and we will interpret that as well as part of the mix as something that helps us determine what genre this is. So it's a very complex thing. And I mean, it's been 7 years in the making, plus the time that was invested prior to LANDR at university, because the research started in 2007.
Wow.
So there's a lot of research that went into that. Now, what's exciting about this is that because so many people came and uploaded their song for LANDR to provide a master, we started over the years to expand what we offer. So now when people upload a song on LANDR, they can also distribute it on Apple Music, Spotify, and 150 sites like that.
Right.
Every time we do that, we'll collect their royalties and give that into a payout account within LANDR, right? So that's one thing. Prior to that, when people come to LANDR, they're able to find millions of samples that they can use. Some of them are free, some of them are under subscription, so that if there's an instrument missing, or if they like to get one shot, or if they want to beef up their mix, they can download samples on LANDR to augment that. We also have plugins. So, and every time, the way that LANDR is designed is anything that we do needs to be easy to figure out, because we know people don't want to go there and start studying for weeks before they're able to use something, right? So we have a test, we call that the 15 seconds test. If we expose you to a LANDR product, you have to be able to start using it within 15 seconds.
Right.
Because otherwise it's too complicated. So you have kind of small step approach to these things, right? So you start with this, and then once you're good with that, perhaps you'd like to go with a more advanced tool. And LANDR is also unique because we've been one of the heaviest investor into a blog. Our blog, LANDR blog, is probably the most visited blog in music tech out there. Yeah. There's
awesome.
Millions of people reading that every month.
Right.
And we talk about every topic that relates to finding inspiration when you try to create, right? Figuring out what tool to use in certain cases, in certain use cases. How do you find an audience? You know, how do you find collaborators and so forth? So everything so that people can feel safe. And because one of the things at LANDR, our slogan is create, we'll do the rest.
Right.
Right. So it's really, it's our positioning. And same thing with the AI, right? LANDR mastering, it's not there to create, it's there to finish a song that was created by a musician. If you go on LANDR samples, we have an AI technology that's called Selector. And LANDR Selector, what it does is if you choose a sample on LANDR, we will provide you with recommended samples that go nicely along with that. Right. So if you go on LANDR and you choose a sample, we'll offer you hundreds and thousands of samples that are a good fit for that. And we then offer you the ability to choose up to 8 of these samples all together at once at any given point in time. And we will automatically time stretch them and adjust them so that they fit nicely.
That's
so
awesome.
Think about that. You're thinking about creating a melody. You choose 5, 6, 7, 8 samples. And suddenly, within LANDR, we call that environment LANDR creator. So automatically, all these are nicely, perfectly time synced, and everything's perfect so that you don't need to touch anything. And you can listen to them as you like. And then you can select and unselect any of those 8, right? Until you like what you do. And then when you're done, poof, you can download all of these samples, time stretched and pitch shifted automatically right into your DAW, so that you can start creating. Right. So all the curation and the discovery of samples and the curation of samples is all accelerated and simplified on LANDR. Right. And it's easy to do on mobile as well. So now when you're traveling, right? Let's say you're commuting during the day. Well, you can try to come up with what are going to be the samples I'm going to be playing with tonight. Let's say on Ableton or FL Studio or whatnot. And then, so you do all that curation so that night you're not there trying to find samples. You're there to try to actually craft your song.
Right. You know,
so
that's super cool, man. No, that's all right. I mean, I was talking to Drew Silverstein from Amper Music. Maybe you're familiar with them. And he was talking about, how Amper basically can replace the lower tier of music production, for like home videos or YouTube videos, podcasts, those sort of things. And it sounds like you guys at LANDR are also moving into, maybe you were there before, but like what you just said, about creating songs, having AI help you create songs. But are you also trying to basically take over the lower tier of music production, or what's your view on that?
Yeah, no, again, we have a very, very tight positioning. We're there to remove the technical barriers to music creation so that more people are empowered to make music.
Right.
So we never, ever want to replace the existence of a musician. We want, it's seriously, the best analogy is when you talk about photography.
Right.
I mean, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, people would need to get those expensive cameras, right? You would have to adjust the different lighting, the different settings, the focus, so that you'd be able to take a good shot. And then you would take those shots, and when you develop those pictures, most of them would be bad or blurry and so forth, right? So having an sounding great picture was a big problem. And today, right, you have an iPhone, and yes, it's not the best camera, but it can take like a pretty good picture. If of course it's not as, anyway, it can really enable a lot of people to take nice pictures.
Exactly.
We're trying to do exactly that, right? We're trying to enable and empower people to make great music, but they make the music, right? We just avoid them missing out on, people who are tasteful that go on LANDR, they should be able to create a fantastic beat without any technical expertise.
Right.
And then if they can sing on a beat, well, they could be able to create a song of their own with very limited technical skills.
Right.
So we're more there to remove the technical skills required to participate in music creation. And we know then that people who are then active and capable of making songs, they keep on learning. So over time, some of the things we do for them, they'll want to do on their own. But for us, LANDR can do most of what you need to know technically when you begin, and then we just fade out. But it's about productivity. It's about easing the process. It's about removing friction. It's also about introducing you to peers and freelancers. So a few months back, we launched the LANDR Network, in which any professional can create his profile on LANDR, think LinkedIn, right? But as part of his profile, he has everything that's needed to sell his services online, right? So a pro can go on LANDR and basically get his customers to come in and basically hire him through that platform. Very similarly to Airbnb, except we offer that for free for professionals, right? So if any pro, whether they sing, whether they produce, whether they're like, even if they're video makers, even if they're artists, even if they do cover arts, they can go on LANDR, create a profile, and offer their services that way. They can lead their customers to LANDR to conclude a transaction. LANDR doesn't take a cut on that. And then when people come to LANDR and we introduce our users to these professionals, then we take a 10 to 20% commission on that. But only when we really create a new business opportunity for those people.
Right. Interesting, man.
Yeah. And when the pros come to LANDR, when their customer come to LANDR, it's free for the pro. They take all the fees.
Right.
But if their customer then ends up buying something else on LANDR, then the pro makes 20% commission on those sales.
Right.
So we actually try to help musicians and professionals earn more. In fact, our goal is to try to help any professional make at least 10% more revenues per year, just because LANDR are there to support their efficiency and their ability to sell remotely. And I'd say we're kind of, with the COVID situation, these things that we've been creating for years suddenly are becoming a reality. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, definitely, man. You mentioned, the 15-second rule, so to speak. There has to be, someone has to learn how to do a thing in 15 seconds. Who came up with that benchmark, with that rule, so to speak? Was it you guys through testing, or how did that happen?
Well, my co-founder Justin Evans, he's a digital marketing wizard, so he's the one who came up with that. The 15 seconds is like, it's a ballpark thing.
Right.
In advertisement in general, people say that you have the rule of trees.
Right.
So you got 30 seconds to catch somebody's attention, 3 minutes to motivate them to listen further. Otherwise, you can't really spend 30 minutes with them to talk at length about something.
Right.
More like the rule of trees. But on LANDR, we're really trying to avoid the fatigue of having to read and go about. So, in fact, one of the things that you'll relate to is you get images much faster. The information you can put on an image that you can grasp as a human being is much bigger than if you actually use text, right? So we try to favor videos, images, and stuff plus audio, as opposed to forcing people to read books. And we also try to get people to, when they come to LANDR and try something, they don't have to come back tomorrow to learn something else. Right? We're trying to give them something, a gratification immediately, as opposed to, no, you'll have to do that every day for a certain period of time. So it's kind of a strategy of baby steps.
Right. Interesting. But then you spoke about how you can teach musicians how to grow an audience. And I'm very curious, how did you guys at LANDR grew? Is it grow or grew? How did you grew? Is it grow? My grammar is out the window. But how did you grow your audience for LANDR?
Word of mouth in a big way. So 3 big channels.
Right.
So we wrote blogs,
Mm-hmm.
blogs about targeting musicians, so our audience, and we talked about everything but mastering, right? So that people then, when they read about us, they said, "Yeah, who's that company? What do they do? Oh, they do mastering." So we really got people through their curiosity, right? And because we're very good digitally, so we became good on search terms that relate with lots of stuff around music creation and music production. So I'd say the blog and search is a big deal. And then we did create videos and ad campaigns to drive traffic to LANDR. And we also did something back in 2015, 2016. We encapsulated LANDR as a widget that we would deploy on third-party sites from CBaby, TuneCore, and music blogs. So because of that, people were enticed to try LANDR mastering without knowing exactly what it did, so that they would sound better. So partnerships have been a big way. We've been a partner with SoundCloud a number of years back as well. So that was also a source of new users for us.
Cool. But what made you actually go for LANDR? You spoke about the incubator and all that sort of stuff, and the thing being invented here in UK. But what made you say, let's go with this technology or this product?
Well, I'm an entrepreneur by nature, so I've been doing that for a long time, and I was looking to start businesses at the time. So when I looked at the demo presented by the main inventor, I was floored by what looked like something very complex that kind of magically worked, right? So then I digged into it and I spoke to music producers, sound engineers, and I realized that this really had a lot of potential. The potential to help people with low technical skills and low budgets to be able to simplify the step right after GarageBand and all these DAW software. So I figured, you know what? There seems to be something there. And then I spoke to a few people in the Montreal community. There's a lot of musicians. And some that say, "Oh, Rash, not a computer doing this. I don't like it." But some others says, "Wow, man, it sounds great." And then it's like my music. And then people, when they heard that with their music, you can really see the difference before and after, right? And that's the thing with LANDR mastering and mastering in general. If you use a human being to do mastering, you will not master it just for you in case you'd like it, right? Because it's too time consuming. But when it's automated, you can let people try before they buy. So we would basically automate that. And the proportion of people who had like a huge reaction to this was significant. So I said, this looks pretty easy to sell. So big disruption. A lot of people said it couldn't be done, but yet again, we have that technology that we were about to file a patent for, which we did, which we got. And the result was magical, making the cost of this much cheaper than if you had to hire a sound engineer. So I figured, you know what? There's so many bad videos on YouTube with very poor sound. This has to be something that's going to be popular. So we gave it a shot, and our hopes proved right very quickly. And then we kept on investing and investing and investing because we wanted even the pros to use us. And now LANDR is the only automated mastering solution used by the pros. There's a few copycats out there, but the pros only use LANDR.
Awesome, man. But so what was some of the early... So when you initially started LANDR and invested in the beginning, what were some of the early signs you looked for that told you, let's keep going? Like, what was the benchmarks you were looking for?
Well, as usual, I mean, the number of registered users. I would say the spendings of people, because right from the get-go, we started offering subscription and a la carte offering for our masters. So number kept on growing. So we've never stopped growing. So those two were significant. But we wanted people who are making music infrequently. We wanted them to stay on LANDR as well.
Right.
So we've then invested in what they did before they spent time on LANDR mastering.
Right.
So now we've been helping people with plugins and samples and collaboration tools during the creative process, and then after, when people distribute music and try to monetize them. So so we're trying to be in a music creator's life every day, that
Right.
he thinks about music or thinks about, are people listening to what he's doing and so forth. So in essence, we want to be the best friend of music creator.
Right. I mean, because I heard you speak about, inventing versus trying a new combination, like you don't necessarily have to invent a completely new thing. And it sounds like LANDR was one of those, companies or inventions that they didn't necessarily invent a new thing, but they tried a combination of AI and combined that with mastering, I guess. Is that something you also looked for, or that just happened over time, perhaps?
Well, we do kind of both. The actual lander was a real invention. I
Right.
mean, the patent has been granted and so forth. And it was kind of unique. The way that was brought, that was what brought. So the main researcher was a brilliant guy, and the Purdue University worked for years on this. So that was a real invention. But I'd say most of the time at Lander, we look at frustrations of musicians. We look at, and we also pay attention to what's being made outside of the music industry in all sorts of other areas. I mean, take for instance software like Slack, software like some elements of SoundCloud, some elements of Spotify, of Instagram. Basically, we study how consumers are reacting to software and apps and so forth. And every time I use an app myself and I see a software that's nicely made, there's always an element of design that we can bring to LANDR. So LANDR has really been that quest to help the music creator, but the quest has really been about removing friction in the creative process.
Right.
How can we make creative process as pure as can be? So we're really trying to improve the workflows. We're trying to make better tools. We're trying to curate the better sounds. We're trying to integrate third-party tools that make sense for our users as well. We're trying to talk about them. Even in our blog, we're trying to keep our articles short so that you can read them within 5 minutes.
Right.
And when you read it, you'll have a clear call to action in the end that you can use for your next steps and so forth. So there's a lot of looking for insight of productivity and ease of use. And it's funny, but we position ourselves, and I always think about that every day. I act like if I was the big brother, not as a, not 1984, but big brother of the musician, thinking, how can we just make them feel more confident?
Right.
What can we do so that they finish more songs? How can we help them better understand best practices for building an audience? Because building an audience, if you think about that, it's a set of best practices. We're trying to make them so that people don't need to learn all of them and they just focus on what makes sense to them.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah, it's super cool, man. But I also heard maybe you've read that article. I forget what it was called, but it was called you only need 1,000 fans, super fans, etc., to make a living, whatever. And I heard you speak about a similar thing in another interview you did. And was that essentially the big plan in the beginning, to create fans that would themselves promote LANDR? Or
Well, any digital business has to try to do that, because as a software entrepreneur, you always try to create channels
right.
for software to be used by the bigger majority, right? You're trying to reach to your customer base. So of course you hope for that.
How do you do that? How do you create a super fan?
Well, you create a super product. No, I mean, you keep at it until people are just amazed by what it does. So, I mean, if you want to build product, when you talk to people, they say, "Oh man, you got a great product." But you can't stop there. You gotta say, yeah, it's, well, it's probably not perfect, right?
Hmm.
And then say, no, it's pretty good. No, seriously, come on, you don't have to. You don't have to. You can tell me. And then there's always gonna be something that people think you should be doing better.
Right.
And that it's that quest for the perfect products, the perfect experiences
Hmm.
that leads you to something people talk about. Because when something is good enough,
Hmm.
it can be better. When
Right.
something's better, it can be best. But once it's best, suddenly people talk about this.
Hmm.
Because when it's best, people have their best work coming out of it. So if they have their best work and they just think that, man, this is too good to be true, then they talk about it as they have a beer with friends at the pub, or as they take the bus, or as they end up talking about this. So then people go, and so there's a concept of virality.
Hmm.
So it's also the best protection against competition, because if people like you so much, they won't necessarily consider anything else.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what you try to achieve.
Right. And is that done by meticulously talking to customers, like sending out surveys, or how do you guys do it?
Well, we have now a pretty, I mean, we're a larger company today, so
Yeah. Yeah.
there's different roles. Myself, I always take interviews. I interview people.
Right.
Right. Anytime I go on a business trip, I don't do too much business trip these days, but typically I always end up having lunch or chatting with people from the industry. So I always pick people's brains on a topic, on
Hmm.
something they're using. I ask their opinion on a competitor's product. I just dig and dig and dig. So it's curiosity that gets you there.
Right.
And but other people in my company, they will do some surveys. Some
Right.
others, we will just instrument behaviors to understand, the outcome of certain variations of the software to see what people prefer versus one thing and another. So,
Right.
I mean, the web software has become such. I mean, there's so many people working into that outside of the music industry. There's best practices, right?
Hmm.
And there's a lot of VC investors investing in this space. So there's a lot of expertise worldwide
Right.
available. So me as an entrepreneur, I try to make LANDR the best it can be,
Hmm.
which means I'm trying to get all the expertise scattered around a certain number of people,
Hmm.
so that any aspect of LANDR is like the best it can be,
Right.
so that the software becomes the best thing it can be,
Hmm.
so that the creators end up having the best software they can have.
Right. 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 But in the beginning of LANDR, for example, when you maybe didn't have as big of a user base, um, how you see it, you had blogs and stuff, but how did you gain knowledge about what the user thought? Because maybe you didn't get enough answers for your questions, or maybe fewer people took your survey. So how did you gauge if you were going in the right direction or not? If you know what I mean.
Well, most businesses like ours, you start with, I mean, um, a few power users,
Right.
right? So yeah, me on my side, I'm a big music fan.
Hmm.
I'm not a very good musician, but a number of our early employees were musicians,
Right.
and they were those aspiring musicians. One of my two founders was an aspiring musician that dropped. The other one was an aspiring musician who didn't really believe in
Right.
himself as a musician.
Right.
So those personas, if you will, help you understand the challenges that they face.
Hmm.
And Montreal is a musical city. There's tons of bands
Right.
in Montreal. So I mean, every time I would cross the path of a music maker, I would ask him questions about what he does, what he's doing, his challenges, and so forth. So people always want to talk about these things. So
Hmm.
it's never been a problem to get people feedback on this.
Right. Right. Right.
I
Right.
would say.
Makes sense, man. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be, surveys or email campaigns. You can just be talking to your close friend, for example.
Yeah, and anytime somebody ever tried to mix a song,
Hmm.
you say, "Hey, man, drag and drop it on LANDR," and then you watch their reaction.
Hmm.
And then you listen to the master that they got with it, and get their comments, and you see what type of questions they raise. You see what would make this thing something better, and what get really excited. But really early on, the same reaction I had when I saw the invention from Queen Mary is the one that we gathered from musicians. It's kind of magically simple.
Right.
Right. So back in 2013, artificial intelligence was not as popular a topic, right?
Right. Right.
And every time I talked about that with people from the music industry, they'd say, automating mastering using AI, I don't believe in that. It will never work. It's too artistic. It's too complicated.
Right.
But what we did is we really separated the artistic aspects from the technical aspects. So we refrained from intervening on the artistic aspects. So we automated the technical aspects. And because we did that, the artists, they realized that we didn't taint their mixes with something that they didn't bring to the table.
Right.
And they realized, hey, if I can fully do this thing at the mixing stage and understand that the song will be optimally loud, I will have the optimal stereo image and all those technical elements that is mastering. In fact, you know what? I don't care about it so much. I care about sounding pro. I care about competing on loudness and other elements with other artists out there. But I'd rather stick to mixing.
Right.
And that's proved so popular. Because that piece that we're doing, most people, they'd rather spend time producing than mastering.
I mean, yeah, definitely. Because, I mean, myself being in the music industry, mastering has always been the mystery. Like, oh, how is it done? And these days, more and more people are mixing engineers, or they think they are mixing engineers. So is that also why you decided to do the mastering instead of, because you said you guys also did mixing in the beginning, right? Or that was the plan?
Yeah. No, I was together because the invention from Queen Mary University in London was at first, it was targeting to replace a sound engineer in live venues.
Right.
So that's why it would be mixing and mastering the sound for the live space. And but we applied the invention for studio work because we figured that we would be, getting very little licensing revenues from the different mixing consoles out there, manufacturers.
Right.
Because we had those discussions. And when we started talking about how much we could charge them, rapidly we saw that it would be a tiny company.
Right.
So instead of distracting ourselves doing R&D for something that small, we basically stopped considering licensing for mixing console manufacturers and focused solely on a cloud platform.
Right. Makes sense.
It was a good bet at the time, I can tell you now.
Yeah, exactly, man. I mean, if you would have gone for the mixing, live shows, that would have been maybe even a bigger disruptor in the music industry.
Yeah.
But what were some of the early struggles, for LANDR that you encountered before it took off, so to speak?
Well, I mean, when you have a startup like ours, fundraising is always the challenging part. It is very difficult.
Right.
I have met hundreds of investors since I started the company, right? People don't believe in you when you start. So it takes a lot of people until some of them say, oh, okay, yeah, perhaps. And then over time, you manage to do it. And then you raise just enough to hire your team. And then you go to market and you try to generate revenues, and you're feeling that you're going to be short on cash. So you try to find additional investors or additional investment from existing shareholders. And then, so the fundraising part is a big deal. I mean, for me, it's taken probably 50% of my time since I started the company.
Right.
So it's not easy.
What is the hardest part with convincing an investor?
Well, for people to invest, they have to believe in everything you say. So if there's a slight element, let's say when we started with mastering, being the only product that we had, most of the VC investors would say, your addressable market is too small. So the upside for us is not interesting enough. So the size of the addressable market was a big deal in the early days.
Right.
And so that's been that for like the most part of the four or five first year.
Right.
But Spotify did its IPO, and suddenly everybody saw, and LANDR started distributing to streaming services. And then people realized that, oh, creators and streaming revenues and all of that, and the DIY movement and the artists staying indie, all of that was all becoming one, right? And then you saw Spotify trying to court the creators with different tools. And then people realized, okay, all streaming services, and in the end, might need to build a relationship with creators for one reason and another. And all that is making it way more complex. And now you're seeing companies like Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat that are talking about, that are doing that licensed music content to be able to display that within their app. And you think about TikTok, right? Now you're thinking, okay, social media, maybe that's where music will be listened to in the future. And suddenly Spotify is in danger,
right?
Because they're not social featured enough.
Right.
We all know to build an audience nowadays, you start with social media.
Right.
So if a music creator wants to build an audience, he needs to go to social media. Might as well consume that music from social media. So, I mean, why would Facebook not compete with Spotify over time?
That's very interesting, man. I never thought about that, but makes sense.
Predictable.
But talking about streaming and stuff, is it actually? Do you make enough money from? Because you guys also distribute songs and stuff. Do you also make any cut from that, and is it any significant money coming from streaming?
Yeah, we have decent revenues from streaming, but it's something that came after.
Right.
So obviously, let's put it this way: we have a tendency to to double revenues typically year over year.
Right.
So it starts from a certain point, but then it grows, and then word of mouth. So today, most people know us for mastering. A lot of people don't know that we do music distribution. We offer samples, plugins, and so forth, right? So it takes time to spread the word. So distribution is not as big as mastering, but we're certainly one of the top 5 distribution sites out there with CBaby, TuneCore, and DistroKid. Right. So we're very popular. We're very popular, and people that are using LANDR for anything typically use us for distribution as well, because people love the brand. We, by default, we offer people a yearly subscription so that we don't take any royalty commission, right? But we have introduced a low tier so that we take 9 to 15% commission on streaming revenues, so that beginners can reduce their cost of like participating in the space. And then over time, when people start to be successful, they can upgrade their account to just a pure subscription, and they keep all of their royalties for themselves. We're taking, again, we work for musicians. That's our motto. So by doing this, we reduce the barrier to try to earn a living in music. But over time, we leave all royalties to the creators.
Right.
As they get secured in their ability to generate revenues from their work.
Right. That's pretty cool, man. I heard you were a big fan of reading books and stuff. I'm just super curious, what some of the most impactful books have been that you have read.
Listen, it's always a little bit about the moment in time when I read that.
Right.
But I'd say as an entrepreneur, I would say the Everything Store, that talks about how Amazon was built.
Right.
It's really something that is a big inspiration for me at LANDR. Because typically when you start a business, investors will tell you, focus, just do one thing. And me, I didn't want to be just one thing. I wanted to be a comprehensive platform for music creators. So I kind of I kind of forced the hand of my investors so that we would multiply the offerings, so that we would be a one-stop shop for everything about music creation. And when we don't offer a product, we talk about this so that we are curating the best ways to create music for creators. So I'd say the Amazon store was the Everything store was a big inspiration, because Jeff Bezos is a very aggressive, ambitious, and capable guy.
Yeah.
And that proved to be a real inspiration.
Awesome.
But over the years, I've read tons of different things that proved useful, like from marketing books that talks about building a brand to product marketing. Like, a big classic that's starting to age now, but things like From Good to Great, that talks about the fact that as a company, you always try to be something in which you're very, 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 very good at. Right? So understanding what you are incredibly good at make you stand out. And at LANDR, it's always been about the intuitiveness about what we do.
Right.
We cannot and would rather not give you stuff that requires like 20 different configurations, because if we did that, it would make the platform feel inaccessible for beginners.
Right.
So typically what we do is we let you start, and as you leverage and use this, we're going to offer you additional things that you can do from there, but always trying to give you something final and useful that you can do. So anyway, in essence, we're trying to really be accessible and simple and intuitive. That's why we're using visuals. We're using a language as well when we communicate. The copy always tries to be unpretentious, while at the same time we want the pros to feel that this is not trivial, right? So that balance between being accessible yet being respectable.
Yes. Yeah. Makes sense, man. And as a entrepreneur, and I'm someone who I have a huge interest in creating a business, etc. How important is it to allow time to, like, patience, for example, before you determine if something is not working, or maybe you just need to give it more time, you need to have more patience. How has that been in your life as an entrepreneur?
Well, listen, you need to show resilience. So for sure, nothing works from day one. So that's you need to stick to it. But you need to measure everything so that you can at least monitor a continuous improvement, right? So it's not because something is very, very small that it cannot be bigger from last week, so forth. So you gotta, when you start, you set your foot on the ground, you measure yourself, and then you just try to do better the next day, the next week. And you measure and measure and measure. If you can't find a way to improve, even over a period of, let's say, 2 months, you're wasting your time.
Right.
So you have to have a progress, right? And sometimes you're going to go on a plateau, and maybe for a month, nothing is going to improve. But that quest to continuously improve is what shows you that there's hope out there.
Yeah. Well said. Because I read this book a few weeks ago, a month ago or so, about when to quit, and I thought it was a really interesting concept, because it spoke about what you said. You can hit a plateau, but maybe it's just a plateau and it will pass, or it's just a sign that it would not be better. So that's the benefit of measuring, I guess, like you just mentioned.
And again, what I referred to early on in this discussion is you want to talk even more to people who reject you than to those who accept you.
Yeah.
Right. So you understand, because sometimes what you do is you accept that you're not going to be pleasing certain users, right? You might find a trend. So then when you choose what feature to invest in, You don't want to be average for everybody. You got to be very, 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 very good for a subset of people.
Right.
So oftentimes when results aren't so good, it's because one is trying to do too many things at once.
Right. Right.
So always the same thing. What is the value add? What is the use case you're trying to be good at? What is the value proposition? What is the brand promise or what you're trying to achieve? And if everybody says you're failing and you keep on failing, it's not so good. But if some people say that you succeed, some others say you don't, what's the difference between the people who like what you're doing and those who don't? Oftentimes, you just need to then focus on a segment, right? So, but the real competition is about how people are doing something at any given point in time. So if you do something and you offer a product and people use it, the other question you ask them is, what would you use if LANDR didn't exist? Right? Another big test that you ask them is, how would your life be impacted if LANDR did not exist? Would you be okay, not caring so much, and then you really sense the leverage that you have on your market. Right. Tough questions, but you got to be hunting for the tough answers.
Yeah, that's very interesting, man, and yeah, super good insight of how to do things. But you know, for mastering engineers or anyone in the music industry who, you know, are like annoyed by AI or think they're gonna steal his job, etc., etc., how would you recommend they approach like products like LANDR or AI in general to enhance what they do?
Well, listen, everybody is who they are. So, I mean, it's based on, I mean, when you use something, you're always a consumer of a product, right? Whatever is what you're trying to achieve. So if it fits what you'd like to do, then help yourself. I mean, AI serves different purposes. I mean, if your goal is to create, well, LANDR will help you. If your goal is to get the music done by a machine to reduce your costs, well, you can use AI for that. Me, from my standpoint, it goes against the ethos of the company, so we would never do that.
Right.
But AI is useful. It automates stuff that oftentimes human beings don't know how to do, and it augments productivity, which in turn supposedly will help us earn a better living. So
exactly,
or better quality of living.
Exactly, man. Final question. Speaking about, you know, you mentioned failures before, but do you have a favorite failure, you know, or whatever you want to call it, that made you go to the next level and, you know, actually made you do something better?
Yeah, in my previous life, I started a company back in 1999 that was called Averna, and one of our products was a software called Proligent. It stood for Product Intelligence. I was already in those days trying to get data talk about the quality of how electronic products could be better made, and I spent too much time trying to lead my teams to develop that software as I thought people should embrace it, and not enough interviewing users and departments. And we never really got sales to grow as fast as I wanted for that specific product line. And the reality is that the product was great on paper, but people within the company didn't want that product. That's not, in fact, how it should have been sold to them. So I did not package the software to sell it to the proper people within the organization. So I think today, knowing what I know, if I had spent more time talking to customers, I would have changed the personas I was trying to sell it to. And I think it would be a world standard. Whereas today, it's not world standard. It's a software used by maybe 0.1% of electronic device manufacturers.
Right.
So product positioning, gets people to buy or not into a product, defines as well the roadmap for a product. And if you don't, after a few years, achieve a certain level of commercial success or trend towards commercial success, people just lose hope. So you might have something unique, and there's a lot of products like that exist for people who have invented something great, but you got to get people excited to use it and then make the product perfect. So there's a lot of things that are required for a product to become successful and popular.
Right. Yeah, it's super interesting, man. Because I mean, it can be, yeah, you can have a great idea, but this, I guess the saying is, build it and they will come, doesn't apply really, right?
Absolutely. It's well, some things people will come for,
right?
but it's not automatic, right? So it does depend. But now products are really designed more and more with marketing feature embedded within the software, right? So even for LANDR, the product, yes, it's mastering, it's distribution, it's samples, but the software built by our company also has stuff that makes it viral, that makes it easy to share, that makes it. So these things are ways to help the software grow and acquire users as well. So it's fascinating, and it's fun to be within the music industry leading the way on that.
Yeah, I mean, where do you see you guys going in the next few years, if there is such a plan?
Well, we have a slogan that we use in some of our ads that says "From da to done." Right?
That's cool.
Right. So we really try to complement all of the bigger software like Pro Tools, Avid, Ableton, FL Studio, and Logic, and so forth. So that anything that has to do with collaboration, communication, file sharing, production automation, all of these things, plus distribution and monetization, all of that to be done from within LANDR. Right. So the platform keeps on growing, and we're inviting more and more third-party plugin vendors to offer their plugins from LANDR as well.
Cool.
And we're expanding the content of our blog. So I think people will be buying instruments, subscribing to a DAW, and then subscribing to LANDR, and that's all they'll need to fulfill their career.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, yes. Thank you, Pascal. It was a pleasure talking to you and picking your brain about business, technology, LANDR, all that. So, yeah, thank you for coming out, man.
Thanks, Nicholas. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Pascal, for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to you, and hope you, the listener, enjoyed it as well. Again, feel free to let me know in the comments what you think, if there's any guests you'd like to see coming on to the show, or if you have any comments on this interview, let me know in the comments. Also, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It helps grow the channel and get more and more guests on, and we can do more and more cool stuff for you, the subscriber. So feel free to do that. Also, if you want exclusive access to interviews and be able to ask up-and-coming guests questions, join the Audio Tribe. Just use the link in the description below. Just enter your name and email address that you have joined. It was awesome having you here this week again. It's always a pleasure. I will see you next week. So take care.